Smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity. And make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste, the therapist. Let's go.
Hi, beautiful people. If you've never been into my podcast before, my name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. I come on, I talk to people who are doing things to empower the lives of others by sharing their story. And the whole goal behind me coming on is to help people shift the way they think. So I've been podcasting since 2018. So July is going to be 3 years. And it's been an amazing experience. I get to talk to some amazing people. And then when the pandemic started in March, I decided that I was going to do this on video. So initially it was just audio. And since March, I've been doing this through video. So you can find the podcast streaming on all podcasting platforms if you ever wanted to catch any of the audio episodes. So I'm going to bring my special guest to the platform, and I'm going to have her introduce herself to you all. Hello. Can you introduce yourself to my audience, please?
Hey, everyone. I'm Coach Nickcole Byrd. I am an executive of outreach and missions at a huge church here in Houston, Texas, but I am on assignment in a season for something I did not sign up for, where I am helping women navigate the choppy waters of grief and trauma. And so, I've been doing some amazing things in this small community that I've created, and I'm just excited to be with you today. Celeste, thank you so much.
I'm excited to have you. And Nickcole used to follow me before the podcast when I was on Periscope. What was that like following me back in the days? Because a lot of people don't know. I used to before the podcast, I used to come on and talk about mental health all the time.
Listen, it was a way. I was so uneducated when it came to the area of therapy. You enlightened me. It was like an illumination of what us, and I'm specifically going to speak to Black women that I deal with. Yeah. There was such a schisma when it comes to women in church, right? Because I'm a minister by vocation. And so with women in church, it's such hard. We have such a hard time with trying to get people to make that transition, to realize that you need help beyond the faith. And so even me saying that may make some people quiver.
Oh, I know. And speaking of being a woman of faith, so you are somebody, did you grow up in church?
No, I did not.
Okay.
No, I did not. I always envisioned myself as being maybe a CEO or something like that of an organization. So I had some amazing jobs, and I worked for a Nobel laureate, and I worked for one of the top researchers here in Houston. I also worked for the Houston Oilers. And then I got a call and an assignment to go into the church walls and work. And so my life shifted hugely. And so I never thought I would be in the space that I'm in.
Wow.
Yeah. I always thought that I would be in the marketplace, some big VP of some company, doing my thing, telling people what to do. And I get to tell people what to do. It's just a little different dynamic in the different culture that I serve in.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. So you didn't grow up in church, but eventually ended up in church. Is that where you met your husband?
So here's the thing. I am initially from Galveston, Texas, which is a little small island about an hour and a half away from Houston, which where I live. And I moved to the area, and I met my husband at the Sally's Beauty Supply. I don't know if y'all have that in Boston, but it's called Sally's Beauty Supply. And he had just started his business, and I was in there shopping for shampoo, and that's how I met my husband. My husband has a very intense religious upbringing. And so he meets me, and I go out in the parking lot, and he's like, "Hey, the Lord just told me you're going to be my wife. And at this time, I didn't know the Lord. I'm just out in Houston working, trying to get it. And this guy walks up talking about the Lord told him that I was going to be his wife. I thought it was a setup because I actually had a boyfriend at the time. I was looking around. I was like, yeah, stop playing, this kind of thing. But after 6 months of dating, we were married, and yeah.
And so you got married, and how many kids did you guys have?
I have 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just telling you earlier, my kids I am an empty nester. I know I don't look like it.
No, you don't.
But I have a 30-year-old, a 28-year-old, and a 21-year-old, 2 girls and a boy. So yeah, so we have 3 kids, and we had become a family, and my son is the baby, and so we had an amazing time. We had a lot of plans. We had planned our lives. My husband loves children. If I would have allowed it, I probably would have been 7 deep, probably now, because he loves kids. And yeah, but we started our lives here in Houston. We got married in a small church. His stepdad married us, and yeah, and his mom's a major minister, and she was like, I've been praying for you. I'm like, who are these people talking about? But, after having my son, there was a big transition and transformation in my life when I became to lean in and deepen my relationship with God. And so, yeah, and from there, I started going to church and met an amazing young preacher at the time. He was young like me, and joined his ministry. And I've been with my local church over 25 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, a long time. And I've been on staff for 15 years.
Wow.
Working at my local church with my pastor. So me and my pastor grew up with each other.
Yeah, so you're not from church. You meet this amazing man. You get married. You guys built this amazing life together over the years, and then things start to change for you in 2019. Can you walk people through like what life looked like in 2019 for you and how it changed?
Yeah. So the ministry that I work for is high-paced, contemporary, lots of young adults, lots of evolving. We're always trying to keep up with the times. I have served in every area. I was really busy. We had a son. My son plays D1 basketball. So in between that, we're traveling all over the country with my son. My daughters had graduated from college and moved on. And we moved out of our home to a mid-rise because my son goes off to college. And so me and my husband, we had been talking about, our life after, the children have moved out. We knew that we would still be heavily involved with my son because he's still in college right now playing college ball. We knew we were going to do that. But we had dreams of doing more missions. I have a love for missions in Haiti. And so I was doing missions, and I said we were going to go, and I was going to stay longer, and we're going to do all these things. And so I felt like we were in a season where things were going to be winding down a little bit more for me. I wasn't going to be moving as much as I was in the ministry that I was in. And we were going to really lean in on our marriage. However, in the summer of 2019, my husband got really ill. He got really ill. And we took him to a hospital, and they said he had ulcers. They said he had real bad ulcers. They did all these tests. They gave him medicine, and they sent us home. Well, while he was home, he got even sicker. And so we went back to the hospital where he never returned. And so still today, we really don't know. They speculated of different autoimmune diseases that he may have had. But my husband, around 3:45 in the morning, passed away. And I just couldn't believe that. What makes my story, I believe, so unique, Celeste, is that I had been known as this charismatic leader, servant leader, always serving other people, praying for other people, watching God through my prayers be a blessing to families. I was big on outreach, feeding the poor, all that stuff, all that doing. And so anything that I prayed for, I believe God would answer the prayer in my favor. And so with my husband getting sick, I was praying and I had people praying, and I just did not sense or discern that this chapter of my life was coming to an end. And so when he passed away, everything that I had known about God was now on the altar to be challenged in my life, if that makes sense. Every scripture I ever read, everything I ever taught, who I am and who I was called to be, I was looking at myself in the mirror, wondering if God had just left me. Is this really happening? And so, yeah, tough time, tough season.
So 2019 happens and hold on, let me see something. I heard myself. 2019 happens and and your husband passes away unexpectedly. Prior to that, you felt like you were on a path and you felt like you was pretty grounded. That happening obviously shook you a little bit. How does one get from being so shook by that situation, by the tragic death of your husband, to working with people and helping them move through grief? Because that's a huge transition to take. And I know it wasn't an overnight change. When it comes to grief, grief is something that's very challenging. It's hard. It's the one area that, I've spoken on your platform before, and it's the one area that I've always struggled with. But what was it that really helped kind of lift you up to get to this point?
So it let's see how this goes. So I knew those last few days that my husband was in the hospital, Celeste, something eternally told me that I was going to need some help. Like the things that I saw in the hospital, watching his body deteriorate, the person that I loved, watching him do that. Something told me I was going to need help. So I sought out a therapist. And so the very first maybe few sessions, I wept and wept and wept. And I think I wept more about the fact that who I was no longer. I think I grieved that first. Because
so this idea of changing, like you knew like something, that who you were about to go through some kind of transition, but you didn't really know what that was.
I really didn't know. I kind of envision it is as this. I was this very charismatic leader, preacher, teacher, servant leader, and now I felt like one of my wings had been cut off. I felt so weakened and so helpless and and so lost and disappointed. I was really hurt by that because I knew the space. I had the confidence and I knew the space of how God used me on the platform. And I felt like some of that, I had lost that when I lost my husband. And so I was grieving that I lost a dual ministry. I lost the ministry of my husband and I lost my personal ministry. And what I realized and God is so amazing, because in therapy, I would get these quick revelations. Thank God for my therapist. I would get these quick revelations somehow about the healing process and becoming whole again. And so one of the things was this. The first revelation I got, I'm going to say two things. One, I can be whole again, right? That I can actually heal from what I was feeling. And then the second one was, I lost my husband, but I didn't lose my purpose.
Wow, that's amazing. The I can be whole again is important, because I know a lot of times we tend to feel broken, which is why I think you've been led to this ministry that you're currently in, and then not losing your purpose because it's looking a little different, but you're still technically doing the same thing.
Yeah, but it's most of the things that I was doing, I would be spot on in prayer, praying God to help me with those things. This right here, I understand that I was selected, that I was chosen for it. Because what happens when someone dies in a family, the whole family dynamic has shifted, right? And so families have to pretty much reorganize into a new structure without the person, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
And so for me early on, I knew everything about who I was. I know my life as it was would no longer be again. But I was so shaken by the fact that my family had pretty much disintegrated at the loss of my husband. Well, that was my perspective. Because when two people are married, and I'm going to put this out there, and you may have heard this, you hear people talk about in church, they probably tell you about the soul ties. And they usually talk about soul ties when people are single. It's like, hey, if you sleep around, it takes pieces of you. You take that person with you, and you come into covenant with that person, and you're not even trying to marry that person. Well, the person that you're married to, I believe, when the scripture tells us the two becomes one flesh, that's a soul tie. That's a covenant. And when God decided to sever that relationship, there was a cutting in the spirit. Do you understand? Like,
100% understand.
There was a separation that was so deep and so hurtful and so painful that it was hard for me to really grasp in the beginning.
So I hear you, and it makes a lot of sense. And thinking about how you described that deep, like, cut, like that sounds very painful. So obviously there's anger associated with it, because I want to be pretty like authentic and transparent with my audience about like what that looks like, because yes, you're in a different place and you're still working on healing.
Yes.
But how do you move through that anger part? How did you move through that anger part? Because if that deep cut was there, and you've dedicated your life to serving God and praying, like how do you move through that anger piece of losing him?
So what happened was the therapist would she wouldn't tell me what to do, but she'll give me some things to think about. And so one of the things is she had me think about was this whole idea with the children and how they were having to try to navigate the space as well. And when you look at the family dynamic being shifted, I had to come to a space where I knew that not to be strong for them, but I knew I had to live for them. I was the only parent left. So I knew I had to live for them. And she gave me this interesting statistic, and I went on to read about it, that says 700,000 women become widows each year in the US. And of that number, Celeste, on the average, it says at the 14-year mark, a lot of those women grieve themselves to death.
Wow. I didn't know that. Wow.
So when I saw that, I wouldn't say it was me at my own will, but I knew that I didn't want to be that statistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can see how easily I can start spiraling. So I had the children, which kind of gave me a will to live beyond what I was going through. And so when I saw that also, that there was this huge community of women who were hurt, disappointed, and cut as I was, I decided to create the conversation. I decided to create the conversation. And so little bits at a time, God would give me insights and revelation between therapy, between my faith community, right? And between the people that love me, is how I kind of maneuvered through that.
Yes.
Yes. So I call it a triple threat.
I love that. And for my listeners who's listening, if you hear her story, and this is for people that are grieving, and grief can be actually losing somebody, or we've been grieving during this pandemic. And one clear thing is that it wasn't a one thing that helped you get to this point of shifting your thought process. You had to intentionally create space, right? Create an environment to work on your healing. You're going to the therapy session and doing these things, but nothing's clicking. Little by little, things start to click for you because of all of the action-oriented things that you decided to do. Is that fair to say?
No, that's exactly. I always tell people, so I go back to what I said earlier when I got the revelation that you can become whole again. And so there's a story that I was reminded of in the Bible. Well, this man I think it maybe had been 18 years, he was in an infirmity, and they're at the pool of Bethesda. And each year you could get in the water and be healed, but he never got in the water. And so Jesus appears on the scene and asks him that question: do you want to be made whole? And that wholeness speaks to whatever is broken in your life, you can be restored. Yes. And so, but he asked a question, but he had to make a decision.
Yes. And I use that story literally all the time. And I say, because I remember being in a service, and one of the questions is, why did Jesus ask him, why did he want to be healed? And I'm confused. I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't he want to be healed? He's been waiting 18 years. But then I remember him saying that some people have been so used to struggling that they just kind of choose to keep struggling. And so I thought about that, and it made me realize, like, we have choices, and sometimes the things that we are doing, we're doing it out of habit. We're on autopilot, just kind of going with the flow. We actually have to make an intentional choice to change. And so, like, I think that scripture in the Bible really speaks volumes to, like, for somebody to be there 18 years and, still recognize, like, he has to make a choice. Nobody's going to push him and do it. Nobody's going to say, Nickole, do you want to get healed? Nickole has to choose to go through that process.
So in that scripture, it also dispels that whole cliche or myth of time heals all wounds, right? Because he was there 18 years. So what it tells you is not time heals all wounds. It's what you do with the time that heals the wound.
Yes.
And so I caught on quick that I was going to have to actively participate because I wanted to be healed. I did not want to feel like that. I didn't want to be so broken that I couldn't function in everyday life. That's definitely not who I was, and it's definitely not who I wanted to become. And so, that wholeness and being able to be restored is the message, is my message, that you can heal, you can be restored. And then the vision for me is just to be a picture of that hope and help people navigate that valley experience. Because you could be in the valley, but it says, yea, though I walk through, which suggests to us that there's an other side to this thing. And so I made a decision. And not only did when I made that decision, I gave God permission to come into the space.
Wow,
right?
That's awesome.
Because I could have just sat in that. I can see how people do it. Because I could have easily have just sat and laid in my bed. He told the man at the end, he says, pick up your mat and walk.
Yeah.
The mat was the bed.
Yeah.
And so usually when people grieve, we're lying on our mats. And I'm not saying it's going to happen For me, it was different. I'm about a year and a half in. I'm still working through it, but working through it is how I'm thriving.
Wow.
Working through it is how I'm thriving. And so that's my prayer and hope, is to share that, with other women, that you lost big. I mean, that was a major loss for me. And you really don't realize how huge people are in your life, the anchors that are in your life, until they're no longer there. Because I would stand in the pulpit each week and I'm standing. This is my ministry. But really is what was backing me up that allowed me to stand, which was my husband, my soulmate, right? My covenant partner. And so now that he's gone, there's a shift. So I had to come to a place where I accepted that the roles had changed. My role had changed from wife to now a single woman living on purpose.
That's good. So you go through this transition. One of the Crystal, she wants to know if that's where the group number came from when you talked about 700.
Yeah.
So you're going through this transition. Tell me a little bit about where the vision came from, where you decided, because I spoke at your launch party.
Yeah.
That was actually last year. Was it May?
We did it. Let me see.
Or July? Is the summertime?
Yeah, no. So my husband passed in
August of 2019.
So it may have been August. Yeah. No, my husband passed in September, so it must have been at the year. I tried to do it almost at the year mark, so it may have been August before the anniversary.
August. Okay. Yeah. So I spoke at your launch party. It was amazing. Tell me a little bit about how that vision took place, because right now you just really helped people who may be in a place of transition and trying to understand, like, how do I move through this? And now I feel like you're going to help people who may have a vision, but not sure how to execute it. So what was that like for you to really kind of come up with this vision that you had?
Without sounding too deep, I would say how God kind of operates with me is through words. And so my son, as I mentioned before, was playing basketball, and they had a tournament in the Cayman Islands. And so one of my good girlfriends, she went with me. I'm grieving, but I got to go to the basketball game. He grieving. So we go to the Cayman Islands, and I took advantage of the morning times that I had off, and I would go on the beach and I would have my Bible and pray. And God reminded me of the story of the widow whose husband had died. And when her husband had died, she goes to the prophet and tells the prophet, hey, my husband just died. You know him. He was faithful to you. But the creditors have come to take everything that I have, and they've come to take my sons as slaves. And so the prophet tells her, he says, well, what do you have in your home? And she says, I have nothing but a little bit of oil. And so when I looked at that and I began to study that, the oil was what they call the anointing in the Bible, which was given to you to complete an assignment in the earth. And what she thought was small was really huge, because she did, even though she lost her husband, as I said before, she still had something left over. She had purpose. And so he tells her, he says, go to all your neighbors and borrow these vessels. And he says, go to every neighbor, ask them to give you as many vessels as you can. And I want you and your sons to go in your house and close the door. And I want you to take that little small oil. I want you to begin to fill those vessels. So the Lord began to show me that the vessels were the people that I was going to begin to serve.
Wow.
And that as long as I poured out, like I'm doing right now, as long as I'm pouring out, the oil will keep multiplying.
Wow.
And so as long as she poured, as long as she had a vessel, she was able to pour the oil. Wow. And she was so full, it was so much oil. He said, listen, take that oil, pay off your debts, and you and your sons go live off the rest. So there was an overflow to that. And so the Lord was like, I need you to serve your way through this. And so 700 AD is my service. It's my worship to God in my assignment. I don't walk out in a space where I say I'm the expert. By no means. I may just be a little ahead of some people, but I am just walking and sharing my experience and things that I learn in therapy. Because one of the things I learned too, Celeste, there are so many widows or people who've lost people that do not have the financial resources to even see a therapist.
Yep. Oh, I know that's the case. That's why I appreciate people like you and enjoy having you on. And for you to like use your story. And you started off by saying not to get too deep. But I think even if you don't come from a religious or spiritual background, I think it's important for people to know that God gives us everything that we need. And he does show us. And, you know, I grew up thinking, you know, from watching the movies that there's this like voice that comes to us and speaks to us. And I'm like sitting around waiting for that voice. And as I grew older and more spiritual, I started to understand that it's not about a voice, like, you know, it's about being still and really making space to hear from him. And it comes in all different ways. And it sounds like for you, like numbers, right? So, I mean, words.
Right.
So I do want people to really understand that regardless of what kind of background you have, that it's important to know like we have everything that we need. And I think I try to drive that point home as much as possible.
I kind of want to drive this home too, you know, just for those who may be feeling a little out of form, you're a believer and you're not too sure about the therapy space. If you don't know anything else, know that the makeup of a person is mind, body, and spirit, right? And when you look at therapy, that word therapy means in the Greek healing. And know that 1/3 of Jesus's ministry was a healing ministry. And most of what Jesus does is deal with the mindset. And a lot of people don't know that. That's the first thing, because you come in, he wants to renew your mind. I think we talked about that. He wants to transform the way you think. Because in transforming the way you think, or as Celeste would say, shifting the way you think, right, it's going to shift the way you respond and how you carry out everyday actions. And so in therapy, they're not there to tell me what to do, but they're there to give me fresh perspective and make sure that I stay aligned with the right perspective and keep me accountable to what I say that I value. And so, yeah, we have faith. Faith is our anchor. God deals with the spiritual man, right? But Jesus also dealt with the mind, right? People lost their mind a lot in the Bible.
Yep.
But in therapy, their focus is to deal with the mindset and your perspective. Because when you're grieving and when you're so low, when you're low and you're in the valley, man, I don't know. Was it the Fifth Ward boys or the Ghetto Boys said, your mind's playing tricks on you. And so you need somebody to clear the space and create clarity for you and allow you to be vulnerable, because a lot of times your friends don't have the capacity to handle the grief or the emotional trauma you're going through. So you need a professional. That's all I want to put out there.
No, that's good. And I did not know in Greek therapy meant healing. I had no idea. You just schooled me on today, Nickcole. Thank you, Coach Nickcole. And I also, like, you know, today I actually put out a podcast that said the real battleground takes place in your mind. And I always talk about this. And today, you know, I mean, in the podcast, I talked about how to renew your mind. And for people, you know, a lot, I think, with religion or whatever you believe, I think a lot of people are familiar with the Bible. Throughout the Bible, it talks about renewing your mind. And for some reason, we have stirred away from it. Like we don't do that. If we look at our actions and the way that we are treating our life, a lot of times we just kind of get up, we just kind of go on autopilot, and we're trying to figure out why we're struggling. But if we really stop to look at like, well, what am I feeding my mind? We shouldn't question why we're struggling. Because if I'm doing what society does, and we look at society like right now, society is chaotic. So why wouldn't I feel chaotic? And so that is so on point around the idea of and the importance of renewing your mind and the whole connection that takes place.
Yeah, that's so big for me. So in 700 AD, which is an emotional and wellness group on Facebook, every Monday morning at 7:30 a.m. Central Standard Time, we do Mindset Mondays. Well, I deal with perspective and thoughts because I understand, like I said before, when my thoughts are aligned and in order, then the way I respond and the way I behave will align with those thoughts. And so I want to make sure what I'm putting in what the scripture says, your eye gate and your ear gate, what I hear and what I see, what I feed my spirit man, I'm able to filter right through a healthy place. And so I think another thing to be said, Celeste, is you have to find a good, healthy balance of being and doing. Being and doing. The scripture tells us faith without works is dead. I think faith is where we sit in and we say we believe that God is who he is, but then there's a work, there's an assignment, there's an action that we have to perform that speaks to that faith, that confirms that faith. A lot of times, we just want to say, I'm just going to pray about it. It's going to come a moment that you're going to have to get off your knees and be about it. There's a difference. So I just kind of, I know that's kind of hard, someone that's grieving. Even I had to have a hard conversation with myself, and I had to make the decision what the next chapter of my life was going to be. I could have easily just leaned into that thing and just sat around in grief. I could have easily have done that.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. Having faith, being about it is important. And so as far as like being about it, when that vision took place, was there any fear attached to you kind of doing this launch? Mm-hmm. And anything like that come up for you as you was trying to like navigate this vision that you was trying to put forth?
I felt so unqualified. I'm like, God, I'm hurting. I need you to be working on my heart, healing my heart. My kids need you. I need to focus on my kids. But notice I keep saying what I need. What I need. But as soon as I got outside myself, and in the conversations that I would have with the ladies, healing was happening on the inside simultaneously. As I would minister to them, they were ministering to me, the very act of it. And so I always tell people, get outside yourself and allow God to use you and watch God heal your heart. And so that's how I'm able to thrive in the way that I do. Some people look at me, I know sometimes it's like, they are people that know what I've been through. They ask me how. And I just tell them, my confidence is in God, right? He gave me an amazing God-fearing therapist, right? And I have a faith community. I have a few people that just kind of love me through it. And I think that's what you need. You need those three things in your life in order to make it through grief, because it's a tough space to be. I truly don't believe we're built to handle grief in that way. I truly don't believe we were built to handle it in that way. So he gives us tools where we have to rely on him and rely on people sometimes to help us get through it.
Right. The community piece, that unfortunately, like in America, I think we're so individualistic.
Mm,
We've moving so far away from it. But and I think if even, most people know about Jesus, he had people with him. He
yeah.
made space to be still and
Mhm,
talk through his pain and his struggle. But he was a part of community.
mhm,
And I think that, for anybody listening today that might find themselves struggling, definitely work on finding your tribe, because it's there, right?
mhm,
Even if it starts with Nicole's group, you'll find the link in the show notes. And for people listening on Facebook, I put the link in the chat. You can definitely like tap into that
mhm,
to work through the grief, because I think that that's a really powerful thing that you can do.
mhm.
So now you create this group, and that's going well, and people can like tap into that. But also somehow you had this vision to create a book
Right.
that people can get on pre-order, called The Widow's Oil. How did that
Mm.
come about?
It comes from the story of the widow I told you guys earlier. And so it was crazy. After I left that beach, these words began to pour out of me, like really pour. I was excited by all the stuff that I was able to put to paper, but also this, that as I was writing, I was healing, right? Because I was forced to, at first, I was afraid of it because I had to keep reliving certain moments when I talk about it. But I understood the more I talked, the more healing became available, right? I was releasing. Every time I was writing, I was releasing. Every time I was speaking, I was releasing. So I believe that there was, and I use this word very lightly, I believe there was some acceleration because of that. Because a lot of times you don't want to talk about it, you don't want to share, you actually want to run away from what you're dealing with. You actually do. You don't want to keep rehearsing those moments of the trauma that you're experiencing. So to write a book was more of a healing aid for me, and but it's going to be a blessing for those that read. So yeah, that book is now on pre-order on my website, and so I'm putting that together. With that, also I did a course that's about 4 weeks. That's complementary to that book.
Wow.
And so I had my first beta group go through that course. And so it's about 5 videos with a workbook that kind of goes with that as well, that people can chime into. But all of that is on my website. So yeah, um, I've been in a tough season, but God has been faithful even in that tough season.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And one of the things for my listeners that Nickole kind of talked about doing, the writing, the talking, what happens when we don't talk about it? And it's not about, you don't have to blast it to everybody. You don't have to become a coach.
Right.
But one thing about not like working through it is that it can stay stagnant. It sits in your system.
Mm,
It starts to affect your relationships with your family, your kids. It can affect your body.
mm,
When we don't deal with trauma, when we don't deal with the grief, it can really, you can start having medical conditions. All of it's related,
mm,
mental, spiritual, physical, it's all related. And so even though it's a hard thing to do, trying to like move through it and trying to process, there's nothing easy about it. And if you listen to this, I'm very transparent about the fact that life is hard, and it's not easy. But if you choose not to be a part of the process will continue to go on without you. And I do not want the process to happen without me, because I know it turns into this faulty narrative. And so my lens starts to look faulty. And so if you want to work on your lens, especially if you've grown up in spaces where things have been traumatic for you, if you want to work on your lens, it's so important that you make space to process, so that you can work on reframing it and kind of seeing things in the path that, like, your destiny is to live a fulfilled life. to walk in purpose. And I think too many people are not walking in their purpose is because their lens is really faulty. And so in order for that to change, it requires you to create action and make space to change it. Does that make sense, Coach Nickcole?
That really does. Man, the more I sat on that lady's couch, like I start looking forward to sitting on the couch. I didn't care about what nobody was thinking or what they were going to think about me. They like, she's supposed to be a minister. She's supposed to be a pastor. Oh, yeah. Man, listen, my heart broke. My heart is broken and I need help. And so, yeah, I wanted to not get back to where I was, but to be better for where I was. I wanted to be better for it. And so, and then what I realized, a lot of things that were already there came to the surface in my grief process. And so that's a lot of what we're running from, because all that stuff rises to the top.
Yep.
All that stuff rises to the top. But the good thing about grief is that you're able to deal with that. You're able to deal with that in session. So.
Yes. And my godmother, she's on, she says it's like a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. And like you said, like even it shows in the Bible, a lot of people lost their mind. And, you know, I'm 38 and I've been in the mental health field since I was 19. And so I've had, you know, firsthand knowledge of watching this happen with people and understanding the trajectory and how it took place. And a lot of times it happens because, you know, we're not taught how to process. We're not taught how to move through. And granted, like, you know, most, you know, Black people, we've never really had a chance to growing up as, I mean, our ancestors being slaves, they never had any choices. They had to keep going. And so like, we don't have to keep the cycle going with just like moving and not really processing. Right. So processing it be a huge advantage of yours if you can just take space to do so.
I think a lot of when I said it rises to the top, I know for me, there was a season for about 6 to 8 weeks that there was a manifestation of anxiety that came along with that came in my body. And so not only was, you know, I was in therapy, and of course my faith community, but when that rose to the top, I mean, I think I went to probably 5 emergency rooms.
Wow. It was that bad.
It was that bad. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I really thought that. And so I get to these hospitals, they check all my vitals. Now, mind you, COVID is happening. They checking vitals. They're doing blood work. They send me back to my regular doctor. She checks all cortisol and all this stuff that you talk about. Nothing's wrong with me physically.
Dang.
Nothing's wrong with me physically. So I had to settle on that first. There's nothing wrong with you physically. Once I settled on that, okay, so I'm not actually dying, right? Because I had that fear of what I seen in the hospital and what I went through with my husband and the decisions I had to make in the hospital. There were some things that I didn't talk about in therapy. There are some things that I didn't even share with my children about what I had seen my husband go through in his body. And so mentally, I was shaken by that.
Yeah.
And found that to be an eternal war going on in my spirit, man, internally. And so the more I talked about that, another thing was really getting that physical exercise going to get that negative energy out of my body. People may not think that they need to do that, but I needed to get out and get fresh air and move my body to get that energy out. So working out is a big piece of my regimen, even more now. And I have a trainer. When you get done, you ain't anxious about nothing. You just want to go to bed. You're not anxious. He's gonna beat the anxiety out of you when he gets done. But I'm joking, but I'm serious. But moving your body, you know, living life and moving your body is I found to be important. So, people say self-care so I needed self-care, but I needed soul care too, because there was a lot of things that were happening on the inside.
Yes, yes, it helps so much. Moving your body, it helps so it's tremendous. And
Mhm.
I look at that as part of my medicine for living. We
Yeah.
all know we all have the regimen to survive because we do it so well, but we don't have the regimen for living. And
Mm,
part of living does require us to think about what's my healthcare plan? What am I eating? Right?
mhm,
What am I exposing myself to?
mhm,
How am I sleeping? Like all of it matters.
mhm,
So if you don't feel like if this is the first time you're hearing anything about moving your body being related to mental health or having a plan for your life in regards to living and not just surviving, really try to tap into that and create a plan for it, because I think it's crucial to
mhm,
that inner peace that everybody is searching for.
mhm, mhm. Most definitely.
So if people wanted to work with Coach Nickole, like how could they do that, my dear?
Site, I think you have it there. It's NiccoleLives.com. That's NICKCOLE, lives, LIVES.com. And I take about 3 one-on-one coaching clients a month. Don't take a lot of those. But if you're just looking for a community and where we share, joining the 700 AD Facebook group is where you want to start. But on my website, there are other things. You can pre-order the copy of the book. You can get in on the course that I talked about. Or if you want to do some one-on-one coaching with me, I can help you do that as well.
That is amazing. Coach Nickole, I'm just so grateful for you sharing your story with us. I always like to ask people if there's somebody listening to this and they're finding themselves inspired by your story. What would you tell them the next move they should make right now to get themselves on track?
Mhm. I would tell them, as I said early on, that you have to make a decision about how you want to live your life. And even though that hurt and that brokenness and that disappointment is welling up in your soul, you got to know that God has intentionally created a life of abundance for you, and that's still available in spite of what you have been through. And so I took that lifeline. There's an additional lifeline beyond the experience, beyond what you're currently experiencing. And so living through it, right, means I'm living a healthy space. I'm living in a healthy space in every area of my life, mentally, physically, emotionally, all of it. God can do that for you. So wholeness is the goal. Wholeness is the goal.
That's so good. One of the things I say is if you're listening to me and if you're breathing, there's always room for change.
Mhm.
And another quote that I love is "Broken crayons still color," and I think that we don't use crayons as much as we did growing up, but they still hold their value, right? No matter if they're broken, you may have to maneuver it a little bit to work with it in color, but it
Mhm.
still has the same value. And so your words of inspiration is so amazing. And I know it's going to help a lot of people today.
Thank you. I appreciate sharing in this space. Thank you so much. I love you, Celeste. I love
Oh,
listening to you. So thank you so much. Thank you.
thank you so much for being here. And for people listening, all the links to the book, the Facebook group, and the website, all is going to be in the show notes. So you can click on it and be directly connected with Coach Nickole. So thank you. Yes, she is so awesome. You're so awesome. Okay. Bye, Coach Nickole. Oh, she's so awesome. So thank you guys for listening. That was amazing. I spoke at her launch party for 700 AD. So it's a grief and wellness group. It's an amazing group. I'm in the group as well. She does Monday mindsets. I believe it's Monday mornings. Today's Monday. Yeah, she did it today. Monday morning, she does mindset groups. It looks just like this. Let me take off Angelique. Yes, Angelique, she's so good. 700 AD, grief and wellness. So I didn't know where that number came from. So it was awesome to actually, I love when I get to talk to people that I've been following for a while. So I really enjoyed learning about how that came about with the widow's oil. And that was pretty, I felt like I'm sitting here in the audience with y'all listening to her go through the story. It's pretty impressive how everything kind of aligned. And I think one thing I want you to get out of her story, even though she's smiling and she's working through this, is that she went through some things, and the things that she went through, she was able to work through it. And so everybody's timeline or what it looks like working through it is going to look different. It's not a one size fits all when it comes to healing. But I do believe that we are supposed to be healed. I don't believe we're supposed to be stagnant. And I know a lot of times depending on your circumstances and what you've gone through, on top of what may be happening now, it can feel confusing. Like it feels like this is the way my life is supposed to be, and it's not the way it's supposed to be. So I really want you to think about that as you are trying to go through this journey of life, is that is hard. But if you not just have faith, but actually action and put in the work, things will definitely start to look differently. So thank you guys. Oh, it is Mindset Mondays. Okay. Thank you, Angelique. So thank you guys so much for being here, for joining in. I appreciate you. This episode is going to be on the podcast. So if you're not following the podcast, you can find it on all podcasting platforms, Celeste the Therapist. That way you can listen to it again, share it with somebody that you love. And I will see you guys on Thursday.
Smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rain.